Вітаю всіх, хто зібрався сьогодні в цьому залі.
I welcome everyone who is here today, and especially I welcome all of us who are watching us online at the online resources of Pitch UA. My name is Alexander Klemenov. I'm the representative of the Project Transformation Communications activity of the American Agency on International Development, USAID, with the support of which we have today's meeting, and with the support of which for several years in a row, we have the competition, the contest of the socially important content Pitch UA, the content for TV, for cinema, and online media. In this competition, there can be any participants, the producers of content from Ukraine. We do invite all of you, and we really hope that among you there will be the future participants of this competition, because there are lots of projects which got funding thanks to Pitch UA competition and which were shown on the TV and even in the cinemas. You will see our projects as well, and online platforms which show them too. So to help Ukrainian professionals and experts, the representatives of the Ukrainian audiovisual industry, and in particular, those who are just the beginners, those who are just now are attracted and involved into the bigger projects, we have launched this year some educational platform of Pitch UA, within which we are organizing the workshops, the meetings with the participants of the international experts, the experts which are also taking part in the competition of Pitch UA and provide the doctoring of the projects which are applying for that. They help to improve them. But within our educational platform, our experts are sharing their knowledge with the participants for you to feel simpler, to make the procedure of the application simpler for you and to prepare, and for the projects of social important content to be interesting, for them to be shown on air by the TV channels, for them to be shown by the distribution companies. That is why we are so happy that you are taking part today, and we do hope that this meeting today will be interesting and useful for you, because the topic, as you can see, is just the one which should provide the long lines, the cues to get to such a workshop, because what can be more important than the script structure for any format? This is not the only meeting. As I told you, we launched the educational platform this year, and we've got the first workshops which took place in June within Molodist Film Festival. Then we had one more workshop within Lviv Media Forum. And today, together with the Ukrainian Film School, we are really grateful for cooperation. And in fact, all of our events, we attempt to integrate them with some real events taking place in Ukraine, for it not to be just an online lecture, but for us to have people offline, how it is happening today. All of our events are being pre-recorded, and you can watch them later at the YouTube channel of Pitch UA, or you can visit our website, pitchua.com, and read all the info about the competition, first of all, and get acquainted with the recordings of the workshops which we already posted. So if you would like to share what you see today, you can send the link, and they will be able to watch these workshops, because it is totally for free. We do appeal for you. Please visit our following events. The next event will happen just in a couple of days on the 21st. Here as well, but we will speak about that later, or you can get to know about that from our announcements. So please subscribe our page in Facebook and follow our announcements. And today we've got our Hollywood experts with you, Adam Siegel and Josh Weinstock, the scriptwriters and producers who got numerous awards, but most of all, the most important thing, that they had lots of interesting content shown. That's why they're cooperating with us. And We have invited them for them to share with us your knowledge. I give the floor to them. And I do hope that it will be interesting for you and you will involve your friends for our following events. Please.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Adam Siegel.
And I am Josh Weinstock.
And Josh and I here are both experts for Pitch UA. Today we're going to be covering, and we're going to kind of jump right into it, our talk around structure for both film and television. What we're going to do is basically, we have two guests who we pre-recorded. We're going to watch our talks with them, and then afterwards, Josh and I will give a breakdown of what are the key points. So that's when you can take out your notes and write down all of the key points then. But for now, just sit back and listen and hear the conversation.
Thanks, Adam. So our first guest is Chris Sparling, who is a screenwriter who has had multiple projects produced, including films like Greenland with Jared Butler, Buried with Ryan Reynolds, and Sea of Trees with Matthew McConaughey and Naomi Watts. He currently has a film on Netflix called Intrusion, which became the #1 most watched film on Netflix for the month of September. And he's currently writing a sequel to Greenland right now. So we'll start him. He'll focus primarily on feature film, and then we'll talk about television. So if you want to roll the video for Chris, that would be great. Hey, Chris, good to see you, buddy.
Hi, Chris.
Good to see you.
So I guess let's just start with the idea when you are sitting down and about to write a new script. How do you think about story structure, and how does it affect the decisions you make when you begin to sort of plot out the storylines?
It doesn't, I mean, for me, it's interesting. When you're starting out as a screenwriter, I think you're focusing more on the quote unquote mechanics of it, right? It's no different than if you're an athlete, you have to learn the fundamentals. Your body learns the fundamentals. And then over time, through practice, you don't think about those fundamentals anymore because they're so ingrained in your every move, even as you get better. So when I set out now, is really not much thought into the structure of it all, because the structure is always going to more or less be the structure. I mean, 90% of movies generally follow a pretty similar superstructure, if you will. There's some that don't, but the vast majority do. So as I set out and decide, hey, what's going to be the next movie, or is this a worthwhile idea to pursue? I start very broad and just kind of map it onto that structure where it's like, all right, what's the beginning? So we know that we're going to enter a story where someone's going about their life or their lives in whatever the normal way is for that life. And then something's going to happen that catalyzes a change, right? And then that person is then going to embark upon a journey of some kind, whether it is a literal journey or not. They're going to be faced with an obstacle and a decision whether or not to tackle that obstacle, right? And of course they're going to, or else the movie would end. But generally speaking, at that point, you're off and running. So for me, I'm looking at it broadly first to say, what is the beginning of the movie? What is just how this movie starts? What is that thing? And this is typically when someone tells you about an idea they have for a movie, this is what they mean. They're talking about act one. They're talking about, oh, wouldn't it be a great movie if blah happened? And you're like, yeah, that'd be a great setup for a movie. But then you have to figure out, okay, what is the midpoint? What happens around halfway through the movie that changes the thing's direction? So if your character had a goal and a plan to tackle that goal and achieve that goal, something has to change that makes that no longer work. And then you want to, at least I think, you want to know how the movie ends. I mean, it's tough to, at least in my opinion, it's tough to to kind of just be going down a road without really any understanding of where you're going or what you're driving toward. So for me at this early stage, when I'm deciding, is this something I want to pursue? I want to have a pretty clear sense of how everything wraps up in Act 3. So it's that.
And you kind of already say it right there. It's the beginning, middle, and end. It's the 3-act structure, which, it's sort of the natural thing. There have been a lot of discussions about this that I've read online about why it's always this way, but it seems to be that case. But is there a kind of process where you think about sort of how many scenes or sequences in Act 1, and then how many in Act 2, and how many in Act 3? I mean, is this something that you kind of write down a bunch of ideas and then find those, or do you sort of look to make sure I've hit, it's 6 here, 8, then 6, or or something like that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, look, it varies obviously project by project. I mean, just speaking for myself, I mean, I've written movies that are very large in scale, where we have all these moving parts and all these different characters, but I've also written movies that, are so confined to one person's point of view. And those, in terms of especially in terms of the kind of the prep work for writing the script, are very different. Because the latter can seem like more or less you're just writing one long scene or 2 or 3 long scenes.
Is that prep work about research? I'm just going to follow up. Like, is it about the research, or is it about like you have this idea, now it's like you're thinking about the people? Like, are you plotting sort of like, these are like the big moments that you really want to get to, and then organizing that? Is that kind of part of the prep work?
Yeah, it's that, and it's everything else. I mean, if it's a subject that I'm not too personally versed in, research becomes a bigger part of it, where I'm physically, right around me right here, I have things stuck to my wall with like all pages of research I've done for a script I may work on next. Because it's not something that I've lived or I know intimately, or I can just call upon without, again, which is a lot of the times the case where you're just not familiar with something. So it's that. And then it's the refining process too, where it's like I talked before about how I'd like to go in first. And if I feel I have a sense of the beginning, middle, and end, it's like, well, that's a pretty wide aperture, right? I mean, I'd like to kind of narrow, so like drilling down more to say like, all right, well, what are some of the twists and turns? What, obviously getting into character, like what is the driving, who is the main character? Who's the antagonist? What are each of their wants and desires and flaws, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I mean, some people can just spin all those plates at the same time. But I just personally find it very difficult and kind of like to do it in stages. So, and I would honestly encourage, especially newer writers, to try it that way as well, because trying to do it all at once is a lot to manage.
So that brings up like a good point. So like when you are in your early stage of like outlining, right? Like you said that you don't like to just jump in, you like to outline and really kind of get a general sense of direction and where you're going with it. One of the things we often talk about with writers here is that, there's always ABC storylines, right? So obviously A story being your main story and then your subplots. As someone who writes, pretty complex screenplays as yourself, how do you, like in the early outline phase, how do you prioritize like what storylines from the ABC storylines do you want to sort of map out first before you essentially just jump in?
Generally, again, it's knowing what's going to happen to my main character, what their journey is going to look like, broadly speaking, what that main obstacle is going to be. And then as you get into that, then you do get into B plots and C plots and everything. And usually a B plot, not always, but a lot of times is some sort of relationship. So if you have the hero that has to do, X, it's like enter in now this subplot about the, his wife, or it doesn't, and when I say love story, it doesn't have to be just that. It could be like a child, like having to reconcile with an estranged child, for example, or a friend. It could be 2 friends that, whatever it is secondary to the main story, but it does very much play a part of what's going on. The B story is not really the antagonist story. That's not what the B story is. It's something that's going on that at some point, these 2 separate stories are going to meet, and that's going to carry you into the 3rd act. But just speaking of the antagonist, because I mentioned them, I feel that the first part of your movie belongs to your protagonist. All right. So more or less up to your midpoint is a story. And it's not to say we don't check in with the antagonist, because of course we do. We want to know what's going on with them as well. But it's predominantly about watching the protagonist chase down that goal, right? And get closer toward it and closer to it. And that's when I said, like, around the midpoint, something has to happen. The bottom has to drop out. And at that point, the tables turn. And it's not to say that now we don't see the protagonist anymore. The movie's only about the antagonist. No, But now in the second part of the movie, that I feel like that the ownership takes over there for the antagonist, because it's now them succeeding. It's now them winning, pushing back against the protagonist. You know, and seeing those kind of countervailing forces at work, that's where you really get the good stuff. That's where it all comes out, because that's where your conflict comes out and your stakes come out and you start to see them manifesting. You had a sense of what they were and you had an understanding of what they were, but now you're seeing that, again, the manifestation of those stakes and everything else. As for like process stuff though, what I would like to do usually is sit down, write out the movie in paragraph form in about 3 or 4 pages. Nothing elaborate, just like here's act 1, here's act 2, here's act 3. And usually by then I can get a pretty good sense of like, all right, this is a coherent and cogent document and story. I want to plow ahead, but that's not enough. I mean, so now I want to drill down. I'll create a beat sheet. So that is more specific elements within that superstructure of act 1, act 2, and act 3. So it's refining and growing, building out. So now I have more, you know, again, more information that I'm creating here. From there, once I feel like that's in a good place, I'll do a step outline. So basically a step outline is just every scene. This is how I would do it anyways, every scene of the movie. So now it's like with slug lines, interior office day, Chris sits on the Zoom call and does this, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. So paragraph form, scene by scene. And usually by the time that's done, I mean, sometimes that's like a 15-page document, you know, give or take, sometimes 20, sometimes a little less. Again, it varies by the project. But usually from there, I'll import that, I'll cut and paste that into Final Draft or whatever screenwriting software I'm using. And there's just something psychologically just beneficial about that, because you see now, you're like, holy shit, like I've already written, you know, in theory, like 15, 20 pages of my movie. And it gives you this feeling of victory. Like, yeah, you're not just staring at a blank page anymore. You feel like you're on your way. And so from there, like, and I should also mention that somewhere in there, along the way, I'm just kind of really fleshing out my characters more, creating just very simple character bios for my character. I mean, you don't have to do like the Proust questionnaire for all your characters, but like it's just something to get a sense of who they are, what they want, what maybe they're afraid of, what secret they have, if any. And again, these are not set in stone. What their flaw is, that's always a good one, because you don't want perfect characters. And, you know, just the more real you can make your characters, the better. Knowing their voice is also I've done that more than a couple times, and I should do it more often, quite frankly, is to just sit down and just write in the voice of my character, of my lead character.
I think it's really interesting what you've said here, because it's one thing I think people don't get is the relationship between character and structure. And I think it's Robert McKee who talks about this in a very specific way, because it gets to a structural component, the inciting incident. And what he says is that there's characterization. You can know what the character looks like, their gender, you know, how tall they are, you know, their general attitude, what they look like on the surface. That's their characterization. But their character is revealed through their decisions.
Sure.
And the moment when character and structure really first come into real meeting here is in that incident where the protagonist makes a decision. And often, more than not, it's a decision you wouldn't think that person would have done. But it's that decision that sets them on that journey. And that's where it all, I mean, that's kind of thing. Now, do you think about, I've always found that we often find that later, but are you pretty much aware of it when you're doing it? Or is it something you're looking for when you're thinking about the inciting incident and that relationship to the protagonist?
How that character will react. I mean, again, we know they're going to take on the challenge. We know they're going to go on the journey, because otherwise, you know, drop curtain, that's the end of the story.
Right. It's not a movie.
It's not a movie, right? It's so like, it's, I think how that does play in as well is to say, like, what is their process of debate going to look like? What is their, how are they going to feel about having to take this journey? You know, all of those things are part of that. And I think it does, you're right. It's character reveals plot to a certain extent. It drives plot in a certain way, because again, everyone does things and approaches things in a different way. And if if you've done the work to really refine and figure out who your main character is in particular, you're going to see that they are in a way steering the narrative, because again, they're going to tackle a problem differently. One character from this movie is going to be different from this one, and so on and so forth. But that's what makes great characters. And I spoke before about their flaws too. You know, that's also what makes for great characters. You don't want perfect people, because we as an audience can't relate to perfect people. And the other thing is, you use the word reveal, which I think is so important, is that you don't necessarily want all of this stuff to be front and center on these people. Yeah. Again, their characterization, what they look like, all that stuff is fine. That's all front and center. And that may in some way affect or influence how their journey comes about and goes on. But largely, it's more to do with what's inside them and how that is brought to bear, how that is brought to light is completely related to this journey. It should be, because at the end, I mean, that's when we talk about character arcs. We don't want the character to be the same person after the end of this experience. We want them to have changed. We want them to grow. You know, it's not always that, but by and large it is. There's a growth. There's certainly a change. It could be a regression, but because that's still a change, but there's a change. And so if you have everything already at the surface, if you have everything that they wear, everything on their sleeve, there's not much mystery there. There's not much to be revealed. There's not much change to be had. Versus if you're kind of mining and pulling it out of these people, out of these characters through the journey, and the challenges. Yeah.
So like when you, so you had talked about the beat sheet, right? And sort of like filling in the blanks, like once you get like sort of like the characters, and here's sort of like the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? And then you start continuing to flesh out the beat sheet, as you said. You know, and then you talk about like conflicts and obstacles and sort of stakes, both related to the story and then also related to the characters, right? How much, like when you're sort of like outlining the stuff, again, like how detailed do you go before you're like, all right, I'm ready to go? And then also as you start writing, how much freedom do you give yourself, saying like, all right, well, the stuff that's on the beat sheet might not necessarily track as I'm writing the actual script?
Yeah, to answer that part first, I mean, I don't feel beholden to really anything. I mean, to me, it's all in the service of writing the best script possible. So if I'm writing something now and it's not tracking with what I wrote, I mean, unless it's something that veers off completely in a totally new direction that would change so much of everything, in which case I would probably go back and rewrite the beat sheet, you know, and then say like, all right, now this is the new framework from which I'm working. And then as far as how detailed, again, I'm of the belief that the more work you put in up front, the easier the script is going to be. It's no different than like in high school or college with writing term papers, where it's, you know, if you just tried to crank it out in a few hours the night before it's due, it's probably not going to be that great. It's going to be all over the place. But if you did take the time to really outline it and know exactly how one thing is going to logically and naturally progress into the next part, to the next part, to the next part, et cetera, it's going to work. I mean, I kind of always view what we do as screenwriters as is like, our goal is to get across rivers. That's all we do all day long, is get across rivers. And, you know, it's like you're there are some stones there, you can jump to this one, but then if you jump to that one, then you have to jump back and jump to that one. Sometimes you're lucky enough to have your own stone. You just throw it in the ground and then in the water rather, and then use it. But like, you're just trying to constantly get from point A to point B. And that's either physically with your characters or, you know, emotionally or whatever it is, or even to say like, how do I have to, like, this is what I want to happen in this scene. Even if it's a dialogue thing, like, how do I get from talking about this to talking about that? Like, there's such disparate, different topics. Like, how do I get across that river? And so you're kind of standing there at the river's edge going, all right, if I jump there and I talk about this, and then this one can bring up this, so you jump to, so on and so forth, you finally get there. And then, okay, then you encounter the next one and the next one. And if you do that enough times, you're at the end of the movie.
I love that. I've known you for 10 years and I've never heard you say
that. It's
in here. So you pulled it out of me. That's what I was talking about earlier.
We've revealed it. I think,
yes, you revealed it.
I totally identify with what you're talking about. What I also want to get into a little bit here is and you made this point very well at the beginning, and I make this point to everyone: start big, broad, a paragraph for each act, like really big, because that's the only time you're going to have that perspective. Because when you start digging in, you're going to be in the woods, and it's going to be very hard to see the whole forest, because you're looking at the trees and you're trying to figure out how to get crossing the river and doing that. But then when you're reading something, and you're kind of stepping away, what are you looking for to see if it's working? How do you know when we talk about the story's drive, or, you know, their conflict, or feeling like, you know what, this is not engaging, something's not working? What is your instinct there, and how do you get a sense of that? And then what's your approach to fix it?
I think honest self-assessment, not to sound coy or whatever, but like that's the first step, because it has to be achieving emotionally what it's supposed to be achieving emotionally. So if I'm writing something that's supposed to be a thriller, if I'm reading it, if I'm not feeling something like this tension or whatever else as I'm reading it, if it's a horror movie, if I'm not feeling that, if it's a drama, if I'm not feeling like this is dramatic or whatever, it's not working. It's just not. And so I think, you know, in the furthest, again, just like looking at it from the macro sense, that to me is the most important thing. You know, the other side too is even to say what it's doing on the page, because if it's just meandering, if it's going here and there, and it's just like, it's not working. And in those situations, honestly, it took me a long time to realize this, but the most important button on my keyboard is delete. That is the most important button I have, because it's amazing when you're stuck and you're like, oh, I can't get this. If you just went, hold on a second, what if I got rid of the whole damn thing? Like, I'm trying to force something to work, and it's taking so much shoe leather to make something happen or to get somewhere or whatever else. And you're like, hold on, what if it just didn't exist? And reminding yourself of that is important too, because the audience only knows what they see. The reader only knows what they read. They don't just say, oh, this movie or this script would have been better if he left or she left that scene in there. They have no idea that scene ever existed. So that's part of it. But you should know if it's going to work, if it's working before you even start writing the script, because you've done that sort of litmus test is taking place in those earlier stages, right? You're not graduating to the next stage until you've checked the box where you're like, okay, I've written this movie in paragraph form, like 3-4 pages of just A, B, and C, right? Act 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I get it. Boom. Now I can move on. Because if it's not working there, it's not time to move on. You have to fix it. Or, you know, ultimately, if you just find yourself in neutral forever, it's like, well, maybe this isn't the right idea to pursue.
But I do want to follow up on, because this is a really important thing for a lot of the people who are going to watch this, is, you know, how do you gauge the level of conflict and obstacle that the hero is facing? How do you know you've done enough, or too much, or too little, or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, like, I know people will sometimes talk about, oh, like every 5 pages or every 10 pages, something big needs to happen, something that makes me go like, oh shit, or wow, right, or this, or oh my God, whatever it is.
It has to increase over the course of it, right?
Yeah, right. But like, certainly the idea is that you don't want to have 20 pages go by and nothing happens. Like, we're just, again, that meandering sort of like, it's a roller coaster. If you went on a roller coaster, right? And even if it was the fastest roller coaster in the world, and let's say, I have no idea, let's say it went 100 miles per hour, and you start at 100 and you just go for 5 minutes at 100 miles per hour, right? I guarantee you by like minute 3, you're going to be like, wow, that was thrilling, but I'm kind of like used to it. This is all it's going to do now for the last 2 minutes of the, you need, just like any good roller coaster, you need all those dips and twists and turns and slowdowns and speed ups, et cetera, et cetera. And the more of those you have, the just quite frankly, just the more interesting the viewing experience is going to be, the read is going to be. And so where that all comes from is conflict. I mean, this is, at the end of the day, you don't have a movie without conflict. You don't have a movie or a story without conflict or without stakes. And they kind of go hand in hand. So if your conflict is very, very low stakes, it's tough to engage an audience, where if they think, well, so what? So what if the character doesn't accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish? The stakes seem so damn low. It's just like, you know, and that's why I give a credit, you know, I've written a few horror movies, and some thrillers where, you know, in a way with a horror movie, for example, you kind of get the luxury of built-in stakes, because most 99% of horror movies are life or death, right? It's like there's a killer out there, or there's a ghost, whatever. You're gonna die if you don't succeed here. So like the stakes are already super high. That's why I give a lot of credit to people who maybe write like romantic comedies or whatever else, because you have to sell to the audience that the stakes are high. So it's so important and incumbent upon you as a writer to say, like, there has to be conflict, there has to be pushback, and it has to feel like there are real things at play here for this character. And then the other part, not to drone on, but the other part is how you have to make your audience relate to and want to engage with that character in that conflict, in that journey. Because and I've, you know, just like anyone else, I've had my share of projects I've worked on where I failed in that regard. Well, I didn't get the audience sufficiently engaged with the main character or characters to then care enough about their journey, you know, whereas more like, I don't like you, or I don't relate to you, or whatever it is. It's just not enough for them to frankly give a shit whether or not this person succeeds.
Well, they say in dramas and horror, the stakes are life and death. In comedy, the stakes are often shame, embarrassment.
Yeah, sure.
That is like the big stakes in comedy, because that's a fate worse than death, right? To be embarrassed and humiliated. So, but you're right.
That's it. You're right.
But you got to identify
there. Yeah.
Yeah, but you've got to identify that, and that's the point. And you've also hit another point as well, which is you said earlier about you got to know what you're doing. What's the genre? What are you working in, right? So all of this then is related to that.
And what?
Yeah,
Chris,
and this is. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll very quickly. I was just going to say, I think what comes with time and experience is that you learn to kind of do that bushwhacking, if you will, like just kind of like clearing away anything superfluous, or as best you can. Just, you know, it's like, it's sometimes when you're starting out with this, it takes that, you know, you kind of just end up with all of the, use the term shoe leather before, but that's kind of the case, is you end up with a lot of shoe leather. You're not really getting to the meat of what it is you're trying to say. That's what is really going on. What are you trying to say? You know, and what are you trying to do? And like, I think that's what you have to ask yourself when you're working on not just the movie writ large, like the whole script, but each scene, each is like, what does this character want? What are they trying to accomplish? Why are they saying what they're saying to this person? It's not just to exist for the sake of existing in your cool movie. It's because it has to be for a purpose. Like why they're trying to maybe, they have their macro goal. So it's going to be in service of that. We know that, but what are they trying to do? I forget what the quote is, but it's so right, and I'm going to butcher it. And it might have been Mamet, so I'm already butchering like who actually even said it. But like, I think it's something like every scene, every interaction between characters needs to be either like a fight, a debate, or an argument, something like that. It's like, but all of those things are conflict. It's like we can be arguing, we have to be arguing, we have to be disagreeing, we have to be fighting, or we have to, whatever it is. Like, we don't want people completely just in total agreement. Yeah, I think you're great. I think you're great. Okay, this and where are we going with that?
That's boring.
So anyway, Josh, I apologize. Right. It's boring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. We just one more question for you, because I think one of the real success stories about you is that you don't necessarily come from a formal screenwriting background, right? Like, you came from a completely total opposite end industry, and you know, you have really made a name for yourself as now a true Hollywood screenwriter. Were there resources for you early on that you used to sort of help you understand story better? And are there, you know, do you have any advice for anyone listening to like what they should either check out, you know, whether it's a book or just keep reading screenplays or whatnot, just to really help understand how to do it right?
Yeah, I mean, look, my journey to becoming a screenwriter is probably longer than it maybe needed to be. I mean, yes, I needed the time, whatever, the Gladwellian 10,000 hours, whatever it was. I definitely needed to put in my time to get better at it. But I don't think it needed to be as long. I mean, all told, it took me over 10 years to find quote unquote success. But I think there could have been, maybe I could have knocked at least a year or 2 or 3 or more off of that if I had known what I came to know, or I've come to know since. And so first and foremost, reading screenplays, what you just said, Josh, like to me, I would pit that against any formal education out there, quite frankly. If you read let's just say even a screenplay a week, right? So that's 52 a year. I guarantee you by the next year, you will be a vastly better screenwriter, because you will start to understand the language of screenwriting. And that's something that took me a long time to understand, because I didn't do that. I just wrote what I thought a screenplay would look and read like, right? And I don't mean formatting. Formatting's simple. People that spend too much time talking about the software does the formatting, okay? Right. So that's not the conversation. The conversation is what it reads like, the economy of the writing, how you keep a reader engaged, how you make it a vertical read as opposed to a horizontal read, all those things. And you do that from reading screenplays and going, oh, that's how they did. Even more specifically, like, oh, that's how this person wrote a car chase, let's just say. Because again, if you've never written a car chase, you might be like, how do I do that? And there's no set in stone way to do it. But if all of a sudden you read now 4 or 5 different screenplays that had car chases, and you saw there were like 4 or 5 different approaches, and you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. I can kind of alchemize some of this and turn it into, but you on your own might be just really winging it and not kind of getting it, in a way. So reading screenplays, books, I talked about a beat sheet earlier. And for me, really an eye-opener was reading Save the Cat. I mean, there are people in our industry that talk about screenwriting like books, and they talk about this, and they go, well, and they look down their nose at them and everything. Whatever. I mean, I say, especially when you're starting out, that Save the Cat is a great book, because I talked before about trying to spin all these plates. And if you're trying to spin the plate of character building and this and that and this, it's going to seem like a lot. But if you can break it down into these bite-sized sort of things, it's a lot easier, or it becomes kind of like this building process. So Save the Cat was a very good, again, it's not gospel. Don't read Save the Cat and say, oh, they say an inciting incident should be on page 15 or 12, whatever 15, it is. Right? Yeah. So that's where mine has to go. Yeah, no, these are generalities. These are like good kind of ideas of where certain things happen. And then lastly, something that I think is fantastic that came out a few years ago is Michael Arndt put out these 2 videos. One about beginnings, and Michael Arndt is the writer of Little Miss Sunshine and Toy Story 3 or whatever. He separates like what makes the difference between a bad ending of a movie, what makes a good ending of a movie, and what makes an amazing ending. Like how come some movies you walk away from and go, oh my God, that was an amazing movie and an amazing ending. And so he explains really why. And again, it's easy to kind of fall, if you watch something like that, just like with some of these screenwriting books, it's easy to fall into the trap of like, oh my God, they're telling me I need to over intellectualize this whole thing and be like, oh, at this point, this needs to happen. That's not, and Arndt's careful to point this out in the thing. He's like, no, this is not gospel. I'm just telling you, this is kind of the stuff. It's almost like this is the stuff going on behind the scenes, whether you realized it or not. Like, this is how the movie magic happens from the screenwriting level.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Yeah, this was great.
This was wonderful.
And,
all right.
Thank
you, guys.
Take care.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. There we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. Hi, everyone. We're back. Okay, so we're gonna do another video. Now we're gonna talk about television. And our guest now is Dailyn Rodriguez. Dailyn has been a writer in Hollywood on a number of shows, including Emmy award-winning shows like Ugly Betty, but also worked on shows like 90210, Lie to Me, and most recently she is the showrunner of one of USA's most successful television series called Queen of the South. Dailyn has a great perspective, and I think you'll enjoy hearing how she sees structure in television. All right, let's go to the video.
Hi, Dailyn. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to talk to you. We're going to focus really on story and structure for television. And what's great about you is not only are you a showrunner, you've worked in drama and comedy, so you can really help us sort of understand the thought process in constructing those stories. Just to start with, when you are looking at a script, it's a new script for a show you're running, what do you think, what are the first things you think about? Like, what is the most important thing to start thinking in terms of like what's going to give you your structure?
Well, the first thing you need to figure out is what is the dramatic question for the episode? In other words, what is the episode about? What is the basic story? And how are you going to answer the dramatic question for the 42 to 50 pages that is a 1 hour drama? So that's the first thing that you do. And then from there, that's when you know how to sort of come up with the plot points that help you tell that story in an hour of television.
And you just said it, like, what do you think is the difference between a plot and a story?
The story is literally what the episode of television is actually about. It's like, for example, this episode is about the main character needs, let's say the main character is my character on Queen of the South. She's a drug dealer, right? So she needs to take over territory in Mexico. So that's what the episode is about. It's about her expanding her business and taking over an area of Mexico. And the dramatic question is, will she be able to do that? How will she be able to do that? And so that's the story. The plot is all the story, all the pieces that you have to put together scene after scene to answer that dramatic question and explain the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
So like when you're thinking about plot and story, just in terms of structure, right? So whether you're, let's say you have a concept and you're plotting out the pilot or even on an episode, right? Are you thinking about structure in sort of your classic form, basically setup, confrontation, resolution, what we obviously normally refer to as the 3-act structure? Or because of television, do you sort of approach it differently because of the page count?
Yeah, you approach it a little differently because you have to. So for people that don't know, in American television, you have about anywhere from 5 to 6 acts, depending on what network, if you broadcast. Even when, to an extent, you have in streaming television, like a Netflix show, you may have actually maybe more of a traditional screenplay structure. You may have more of like a 3-act structure. But basically, for most television, you have a 5 to 6 act structure, and you're structuring around commercial breaks. So the big thing that I've noticed, especially in 1 hour drama, is that usually what happens is that you have, by the end of your, let's say you have a 5-act structure. By the end of your 4th act, that's when you've had a gigantic climax. So let's take something like Queen of the South, my show. Your act 4 is usually a big action sequence where everything comes to head, all the conflict explodes, and you usually leave a little bit left to get unresolved for the top of act 5, and then act 5 is your denouement where you go spiraling towards the end of the episode. So that's usually the way that you would structure a 5-act structure.
And then what would you describe that sort of is the difference though between like a 5-act and a 6-act structure? Like what is that?
There's usually like in a 6-act structure, you usually just have a teaser that starts out the episode, and that could be anywhere between like 3 pages to 6 pages. Usually, at least network television and broadcast wants you to do like a 5-minute first act, and it's usually, so that's a teaser and then 5 acts after that. But really the teaser always feels like it's part of the first act, even though there's a commercial break. It's just the way that they sort of structure it. So it kind of is, the teaser gives you a taste of what the story is about to be. Sort of you end that teaser with a like little bit of a cliffhanger of like, oh, what's coming next? You know what I mean? And that sort of pushes your story forward into the next act.
And often, if I'm wrong, the teaser may set up that narrative question, right?
It's 100%. That's exactly what the teaser does. 100%. It sets up the narrative question and leaves you with like, oh, well, how, like, oh my God, she just, our protagonist just got attacked by aliens. Oh shit, what's going to happen at the end of this teaser? Oh no. So how is our protagonist going to get out of being attacked by aliens? All right. So now we like move forward into the story. Yeah.
So that's really clear. That's great. So something that we've been talking a lot about since I've been working in Ukraine is the concept of ABC storylines. Can you, how do you explain this and interpret this? I mean, we've all been doing this for so many years, but still it's helpful just so that they understand what that means.
So your A story, your A storyline in a classic 1 hour drama usually 9 times out of 10 revolves around the protagonist of your series. So you would have an entire story that is about a story about your protagonist and a conflict that protagonist has to resolve in an episode. Your B story a lot of times is a secondary character, and it could be a smaller sort of story that's just character, and it's not super plot driven, and maybe just be answering a dramatic question about that character and furthering the character's story in series. That's usually, so it's usually smaller. And then a C story is usually even smaller than that. And in comedies, a lot of times a C story or D story is what we call a runner. And a runner usually is just a comic storyline that really does nothing but make you laugh. It doesn't
it's like a bit. It's
anything.
A small bit.
Yeah,
right.
It's like a small bit. Yeah. But in drama, you rarely have, you never really have any stories that don't further story or character. So both an A, B, or C have to do those things in a 1 hour drama.
Yeah, and a B will carry over, right? So generally speaking, B stories will be
but an A
but
an A can also carry over. An A can carry over if you're not doing a procedural show like Law and Order or CSI. If you're doing a serialized show like Queen of the South or Game of Thrones, a lot of times you'll watch an episode of Game of Thrones and there's a resolution in that episode to an extent, but that A story has created another problem that you will now pick up in the next episode. So that's how you create a serialized show. You may have solved the problem for this episode, but it's created something else that now you have to address in the next episode or 2 episodes down the line. That's how you create sort of a serialized arc.
And our folks there often just only think about what they call procedurals or they call verticals, and serialized we call horizontal. But here we have something kind of both. So what's that like? What is that doing?
Well, I'm sorry. What do you mean, like?
Well, when you have a blended, like a Grey's Anatomy, or
Oh, like what we call a character-driven procedural.
That's right.
Right. Okay. So, like House or Grey's Anatomy. I worked on a show called The Night Shift. So that was a medical show, and basically, you sort of have they mostly work in a series that is about a particular job. So those kinds of series work when it's a medical show or a police show, a detective show. So you have sort of like the story of the week, sort of the patient of the week, the crime of the week. But then you have characters that have really, really developed character stories and interpersonal relationships. So you keep what we like to call, it is not pejorative, this is what we call it in Hollywood, you have the soap storyline, which is basically like the character storyline where you follow their relationships and their love stories, all of that, or their family stories, while you have the patient of the week or the crime of the week. And then, so you serialize the character story, but you close off the basic dramatic question of the week / plot of the week. Does that make sense?
Perfect. That makes total sense. So the A story tends to be the story of the week. Those serial or soap stories tend to be the B stories.
The B story, exactly.
Right. And
I think you're the A story, and they can feed into the A story. Like you could have a problem in the B story that's like a personal problem between two characters, and it rears its head into the A story somehow. Do you know what I mean? That's actually, in a perfect world, when you do character driven procedurals, that's awesome. That's great. That's what you want to do. That's sort of the B story kind of like dovetails with the A story somehow.
That's great.
So, and then also like when you're sort of like plotting out these ABC storylines, especially over the course of a season, right? Do you, like, in terms of like early on when you're like, all right, this is how we're going to track this storyline over the course of, 6-8 episodes, right? What's your approach to that? Do you have like a beat sheet? Do you whiteboard stuff?
Yeah.
Like, how do you track everything?
How do you? I come in, let's say I'm working with the writer's room. So I come in before, it's the beginning of the season, before everybody started working. We come in the first day. And I basically, before that day, I have put 10 polls up on a whiteboard. I have a basic idea of where I want the season to end, what I want the season to end sort of story-wise, and how I want the season to end character-wise. Like where I want to arc my character emotionally, and how I want to arc out my story. And usually those two things kind of are the same. You know what I mean? The story affects character, other way around, right? So I will have like, okay, let's say it's a 10 episode season. I will have an idea of what episode 1 is. And I will follow the arc of the protagonist and realize I need the protagonist by mid-season to, have her boyfriend dies. A huge tragic thing happens in episode 5, because that will galvanize and give me a back half. So the back half of the story is like, I'm going to avenge my boyfriend's death. So the whole back half becomes that. And so you have like these tent poles that are emotional for your character that help create story. So you have all these tent poles and you do it for all your characters. And then your writer's room comes in and they're like, well, maybe it's better if you move boyfriend dying from episode 5 to 3, because actually somebody pitches something really cool for episode 8 that gives you another turn. Do you know what I mean? To get you to the end of what you want. But usually you should know where you want to end your season, and you're working towards that. So that's usually what I do it. And it's all about arcing all your characters.
And I think that's what, one of the things that, because we had a conversation with a feature writer, and they think about, you have to know your ending, and but that's just for your movie. Well, you have to know your ending for your entire season, and that's really why we talk about having the need for these other stories, because it's very hard to make one story so compelling that you can just go the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the reasons you want B stories or C stories, and you want other characters to have their own sort of storylines, are when you're writing a serialized TV show, especially, you need to be able to cut away from the A story, because it's relentless. And you need moments where you have to cut away to another story, either because the character has to move locations, or you're going to commercial. For many reasons, you need to be able to cut to another storyline to be able to release tension and then build tension back
up. So let's talk then a little bit about character. When you are, this is obviously more pertinent to when you're creating a pilot, you're starting out. What is your approach to character development? Do you start with the protagonist and then kind of like look at their relationships, or do you kind of write in their voice? What are some tactics that you use?
Yeah, I always start with figuring out my protagonist and what my protagonist wants, and what their character arc is probably going to be, not just for the pilot, but I kind of think about like, what does this person want in the life of the series? Do you know what I mean? It's like, eventually, where is this character going? If I'm lucky enough to have a 5-season television show, where do I want to end my character? How do I want that character to grow, learn, change? So you usually want to start your pilot in a place of like, the character starting their journey into the series, right? So it's where they at either their lowest point or their most their neediest point, like, so that okay, I'm going to follow this character into, they want to be a doctor, they want to be the best doctor, their goals are to become the biggest drug dealer in the United States of America. Do you know what I mean? Whatever that is, so I kind of start with the protagonist, and then I start wondering who are interesting people to surround this person with, who are interesting people that would create obstacles to your protagonist.
We like that word, yes.
and who are the people that are going to help your character get to where they have to be. So it's like you need your mentors, you need your confidants, you need those people that sort of help you. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes something will happen season 3 and the person that you thought was the confidant, suddenly you decide it's more interesting if they become an enemy and an obstacle. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That's what's so fun about storytelling. That's why people love thrillers so much, because there are always those turns, right? That they're suddenly, oh no, her best friend's actually the murderer, So, but the most interesting thing is to sort of, what are the more interesting characters to surround your protagonist with? And once sort of I have the characters and the world that they all live in, that's when I sort of start going, okay, like, what's the most interesting story to tell with all of these people? What is the most interesting dramatic question that I have for my protagonists? And also, because you want them to buy it, you want, like, what is the most visually interesting, most attention grabbing pilot that you can get to have people come in and decide, oh, I want to root for this character, I want to be on this journey, I want to be with this person for 5 seasons,
Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned obstacles, which is obviously an important part of storytelling. So kind of, can you elaborate a little bit more beyond just the character obstacles? Like, when, again, sort of like you're about to sit down and write a pilot, right? And before you jump in, how do you sort of plot out where the stakes are going to come into play, or where sort of the physical conflict, like how much of that is sort of beat out in your head versus beat out on the page before you actually start typing?
I mean, nothing just stays in my head. I mean, I put things on boards, you know what I mean? I put cards on boards, and then like, I put a card on board, and I figure out, usually you want to establish what the obstacle is up front. So we know what this person has, what their journey is how difficult their journey is going to be through the pilot. So, the biggest thing is like, I usually know that by the end of the teaser, like, okay, this is the dramatic question, and this is the person that's going to prevent our character from achieving a resolution to the dramatic question. And then by the end of the pilot, you should know, like, oh, maybe they resolved that one, but now the antagonist has created another obstacle that will go follow her into the next episode. So I very much, once I get all the cards on the board in my acts, my scenes, I may decide I need a secondary obstacle because I have a lag in the 3rd act. Do you know what I mean? Or something else. It's like, it's not as easy as saying like, oh, there's one obstacle. No, it's like, there's an obstacle, and then the obstacle escalates through the pilot. It's not, you know what I mean? It just gets worse and worse instead of better, because you constantly have to be throwing, it's like literally an obstacle course. If you think about an obstacle course, and you start with the ropes, and you're like, oh, these aren't so bad, I can swing there, but then you fall into a pit of alligators. So now this is your new obstacle course, and you have to get out of that pit of alligators, and then you get to the other side, and it looks like you're on a good jog, and you're good in act 2, you're like jogging, and then all of a sudden a sand pit appears. So like, this is, I mean, if you think of it as an obstacle course, then you know how you're sort of setting up your whole show. Right. That makes it.
No, I think that's a great way of looking at it. And how do you personally measure whether or not that obstacle is cinematic enough or dramatic enough? Like, is there sort of a template that you use to say, all right, well, maybe this isn't working, let's try something different?
My template is giving it to people to read. And if somebody reads it and they're like, ooh, this just, you know, you need something bigger in Act 2. Something bigger has to happen. It's not enough of an obstacle for your main character. It feels like it's too easy. If you hear it's too easy, that's not good. You never want that note, right? So usually I start bringing in other writers to look at my material. I mean, we're not all perfect. So if anybody thinks that like everything that comes out of my brain is genius, that's just not true. So I mean, it's honestly getting other eyes on it and always seeing if there's a better version of what you've written, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's an important thing, right? Is not to be so married to your own creation, right? Like we're in a team business, right? And it's always important to get sort of outside perspective. And, you know, I like to say the best idea always wins, right?
The best idea always wins. And I know a lot of people don't like this saying, but I do. You have to be comfortable killing your babies. And so it just, you have to be like, okay, well, I really loved that baby, but that baby's ugly. It's gotta go.
Gotta go.
You know what I mean?
You know, Dailyn, between your obstacle courses and killing babies, it's pretty scary.
It's scary. Writing is scary. It's terrifying.
But that gets into sort of the, you know, when you do read and you're looking at it after, and you, what is the feeling or how does it work when you're reading something and you're going, this isn't working? And what is the thing that usually isn't working? What are the things you start to go, okay, this is how I have to fix it? What are the general sort of sense of the state of play?
If I'm reading my own script and I'm bored, or I'm reading my own script and I'm not feeling anything emotionally, then there's a problem with my script. Do you know what I mean? The stakes aren't high enough. The emotional stakes, a lot of times it's emotional stakes aren't high enough. Like you haven't dug enough into what this means to your characters. What does the story mean to them? How does it affect them emotionally and personally? And then I usually have to dig into that a little bit more and bring those aspects of your script out. So it becomes more truthful, if that makes any sense. You know?
I think it's being honest, right? Like one of the things I've found is working with there in Ukraine is that sometimes people set up this idea like, well, here are the stakes, but it's like, but that's not really the stakes. Those aren't really stakes. Those are sort of just, it's an inconvenience. It doesn't have much depth to it. It's not, and if it doesn't have the depth, it won't have the conflict.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, look, there are some shows that have very light stakes and they work. I mean, you know, if you look at a lot of romances have very light stakes, you know, but at least like you're rooting for the characters emotionally. So it's kind of, I hate the word stakes a little bit. I have to be honest.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's thrown around a lot. And I think it's an industry term that makes me a little crazy. There are two terms I don't adore. I don't love stakes and I don't love why now. That one also drives me crazy. I think that why now is important to an extent, but like I feel like we get so stuck on the why now having to be something so like extraordinarily huge, which ties into stakes, that it doesn't allow you to tell some smaller stories that I think are as interesting, because I think I think a story can have really strong emotional stakes, but not have really, really strong plot stakes or like story stakes. Do you know what I mean? It's like you could just want to watch it because you want these two people to fall in love, and those are the stakes. Do you know what I mean? So I have such a hard time with like not everything has to be Die Hard, man.
Well, I think that's it, right? Like I worked on a show where literally every week it was about saving the world. And the network was like, you have to save the world every week. And it's like, those aren't stakes. Those are abstract. The stakes are exactly what you're talking about. They're the meaning that the character has in that situation. because that's
Yeah.
where the stakes are, right? And in fact, you might argue is more important than saving the world, right? Because saving the world
It is more important because at the end of the day, we're humans. So we watch entertainment because we're trying to live somebody else's human experience. So the stuff that's relatable is the stuff that we feel deeply emotional about. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, if it's just like, there's no like emotional connection to it. Yeah, it's fun to watch stuff that's just like you blow things up and stuff like that. But the best movies or TV shows that are about that have emotional stakes as well as physical stakes to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think they're more important in a way. I think you're absolutely right. And that's where the idea of character and structure really come together, because it's
That's
about
right.
the emotional stakes and how those play out and at what point those things happen in the story that then tell you your structure. And I think that's the thing to really get that connection.
That's right. Yeah.
What would be your recommendation to screenwriters who are constantly looking to get more information about how to tell a story or a better understanding of how to actually write structure, right? Are there books? Like, do you read tons of pilots or screenplays? Or
I have a couple ideas. One, I think my favorite book that I don't read any more of these books anymore. I went to school. I'm done reading people's. I really like Chris Vogler's A Writer's Journey because it is a sort of dumbed down version of Joseph Campbell's Heroes of a Thousand Faces in the best possible way. And dumbed down doesn't mean negative. I think it's like it really breaks down all the archetypes that are sort of, because a lot of his stuff is very Jungian. So it sort of like breaks down all those archetypes that I think are the reasons that we like. For example, Star Wars has all of that. Do you know what I mean? It's the reason we respond to that movie so much. So I love that book. Another trick that I actually teach people to do, which I think is fun, is that you pick your favorite show that you think has, like, let's say you pick up a show that has like a great pilot. You think it's got a great pilot. What I ask people to do is I ask them to sit down and watch it, but break it down. So like, for example, you start watching and then you write, okay, the first scene of this pilot is exterior beach. And then you sort of write what happens in that scene. And then, but you are basically like writing what's happening. So you can see on page, oh, that's what they did at the end of that teaser. And that's what they did at the end. So you're sort of like, you're outlining in reverse. So you're like watching a show and then outlining it yourself. And I think that teaches people a lot, because you're now seeing, oh, now I understand why they structured it like that, you know?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. I know it's a crazy exercise, but I've had a lot of people do it and have had a lot of success from doing it.
Is there, let me ask you this. Do you have, besides your own projects, right? Is there an example of a pilot, and it's obviously, this is all subjective, but is there a pilot for you that kind of stands out that you're like, oh my goodness, like this is the perfect pilot?
There are a few. I think the Sopranos pilot is brilliant. I think the Breaking Bad pilot is unbelievable, like on another planet. It establishes, if you watch that pilot, establishes the dramatic question. It establishes exactly what's going to happen through the whole series. You understand all the characters, all the obstacles. It's just so perfect. And then like on a sort of more broadcast stuff, I think the pilot for Lost is terrific. I think the pilot for Grey's Anatomy is really great. House is a really good pilot if you're looking at more like character-driven procedural stuff. I think that those are great pilots.
Great examples. I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Dailyn, this is wonderful. Thank you. You have helped us so much. It's so great to put your experience into this. And I know the folks back in Ukraine are really going to appreciate it. So thank you for your time. I hope I can help. And we'll bring you over there. We're going to bring you over.
Oh, awesome. Never been.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks.
All right, everyone. That's a lot of information. So we're going to do a little digest of what you just saw. And then afterwards, we'll let you ask questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Can we bring up the deck now. We're ready to start that. So we're going to recap. Josh and I thought this cartoon was a really good way to open up our recap and our discussion here. So we're going to read it to you so you can get the translation. The little guy reading the book, that's me. We've had our inciting incident and we're on the journey. So it seems like we'll be having a crisis any minute now.
And I say, this quest was a lot more fun, Adam, before you got that book on story structure. So,
and go ahead.
Yeah. No, basically kind of, the point of this is that there's a lot of information out there. It can be very technical, but as Chris pointed out on his video, nothing is gospel, right? Like there are no rules, but with that said, any successful storyteller has these best practices that they use towards formulating and then creating a story.
That's right. And I think what Robert, who was the writer,
William Goldman.
William Goldman. He's the famous Hollywood writer who said, nobody knows anything. And that's true about a lot of things in life, but it's really true about making movies and television. Break rules, but you should know the rules at least before you break them, so you kind of know what you're doing. All right, next slide. So we're going to start with classic act structure.
Yep. Yeah, and this is obviously very important and is used whether you're a television writer, a novelist, a film writer. Is really, you can go to the next slide. Is the 3-act structure, which is basically split up into act 1, which is your setup, act 2 is your confrontation, and then act 3 is the resolution. So just to kind of reiterate, in act 1, it's really the beginning. It's the setup, which is the what if, it's your catalyst, which is your inciting incident. And then, by the end of sort of act 1, that's when the journey begins with your main character. And then, of course, the middle part is where the hero is pursuing the goals. Typically, at the midpoint, you'll have sort of a major reversal, which sort of then throws the plot into a different direction. And of course, the hero's plan always goes wrong. It should go wrong. And then sort of to clear up on the act 3 resolution, that's sort of like the low point for your character, which is typically referred to as the all is lost moment. That should be sort of the bottom of where your character is and sort of where the movie is, where it looks like the villain is going to win. And then obviously will be your climax and ultimately your resolve, where things tend to end with a happy ending.
In Hollywood.
In Hollywood. Yeah.
Next slide, please. So this is just to show you, because it can get a little confusing, particularly around television. The thing to remember, the 3-act structure, it's setup, it's conflict, and it's resolution. So as in the Matrix, right, we sort of have that classic 3-act structure. Now, in television, this gets a little confusing because the way television, particularly in the US, has worked, in particular around broadcast television. In the US, we tend to put commercial breaks throughout the show. And what's happened is that television has been designed around those breaks. And that's why we refer to it as having 5 or 6 acts. Those are literally the act breaks for the commercials. But in the slide, in the image to the right here, it shows you more or less it's the same 3-act structure. As Dailyn said, it's around act 4, which is, if you're doing the 3-act structure, would be the beginning of act 3. But that's really when things start to like go dark and everything goes wrong and the hero is having to deal with it. So if you really think about it, and even Dailyn said this, when you're talking about streamers, and you're talking in particularly television in Ukraine, where you tend to have the show run completely with the commercials at the end, the 3-act structure is pretty much the standard way. So that's the one thing to note. The other point is in television, this tends to be around the A story. So in the episode, it's the story of the week. So it gets a little more complicated when you start talking about the B story, which, as we said, will continue on. The A story here will resolve at least a portion of it. As Dailyn pointed out, that A story can continue. In Game of Thrones, there's multiple A stories and they keep going. But the problem that they dealt with in the episode is usually resolved. And that follows this same sort of structural lineup.
Okay.
Next slide.
We go next slide. All right. So this sort of breaks down the 3-act structure in terms of global and local. And this is obviously for a film using a 100-page screenplay as the example. So this will also give you a sense of where these problems need to be introduced and where they should be ultimately paid off. But basically, your Act 1 should be between 25 and 30 pages. And typically, that's where your problem A, global sort of issue is introduced, which is really your central problem. You know, that's where aliens are about to attack Earth, or terrorists take over a building, or soldiers are about to enter behind enemy lines to go on a mission, right? And that sort of global story, which again is sort of your central problem, will really carry over throughout the 2nd act and into the 3rd act, where ultimately you want to resolve it around, you know, it shows here page 90, so that you have about, you know, 5 to 10 pages of sort of finale to the story. The second part, which is really your local problems, and these are really introduced in the 2nd act, and these are what Chris sort of referred to as crossing rivers, right? This is where your characters need to figure out how to get from point A to point B to point C to point D over and over again, while having to overcome these obstacles that are introduced, both physical obstacles and then also emotional obstacles.
And I want to make a point, Josh, because we didn't do a card for television. So for television, it works where that global point, the global question, that's the global question for the season, for the whole show. And the local problems, those tend to be the problems that, when Dailyn said that the narrative problem for the episode. So those are the ones that are dealt with. Those are the small rivers that you're jumping over. But your global problem, that's something that will continue to be addressed throughout the show. And that's kind of how to see it. It's obviously not in the same kind of page count. It's different because you have your global problem, which carries you through 12 or 20 episodes or however many in your season. That's it. Next slide. So we'll get to character, which is obviously incredibly important. Next slide. We'll start with understanding the protagonist. And what we mentioned in the discussion with Chris, that when you think about, and I mentioned that there was this idea that there's this concept of a characterization versus character. So the characterization is simply what you describe the character as. A woman with, looks this certain way, wears really expensive sunglasses. These are all these appearances. These are all the things that you can just tell by immediately seeing them. But the actual character is this inner life. And this has to do with the choices and decisions that this character makes. And I'll be back, but I'll keep talking anyway. Oh, there we go. And we often talk about, whether it's in a film or in a TV show, that first decision that really is often a surprise. It's the thing that kind of sets everything into motion. And in our example we'll use is Breaking Bad. So, in Breaking Bad, obviously they use kind of an elliptical story, because you see the end of the episode and then you cut to the beginning about how it began. But you understand this man is kind of like living a very sort of normal life as a teacher in a high school. But then, because of what's happening to him, he is going to start making meth, which is not like what a normal high school teacher does. And that decision then sets him on this course. That gets us to the next point, which is about the wants, right? You have to, and understand the wants, we have to understand what the earlier slide was. What are the goals? What are the global goals? What are the big term goals? And then what are the smaller local goals that you have to achieve? And this has a direct relationship to something we'll explore in a second about the external and the internal stakes that the character has. And so in our Walter White example in Breaking Bad, the external stakes is that he's dying, and he wants to give his family something so that they can live and survive. That's his duty as a caretaker for the family. The internal stakes for Walter White is that this was a brilliant scientist who sees himself as having failed. So when he makes meth, he's going to make really good meth. Like, he's going to make the best meth that has ever been made in the drug world ever. And that pursuit of making sure that he does the best and he really sort of out delivers becomes the external proof that he isn't a failure. And that's his internal sort of stakes. And then finally, we get to the obstacles. Obstacles are incredibly important. And the best way to get obstacles is to throw people at your main character. Usually it can be the antagonist, it can be other people, it can be various different things, often relating to each of the stakes, right? So and these are often our supporting characters. So in Breaking Bad, Walter White, he has his wife and his children he has to hide this other side from, as well as the fact that, as it turns out, his brother-in-law is a DEA agent. So immediately, this is throwing all these obstacles that he's constantly having to fight through as he's pursuing his goals. Next slide. There we go.
The juxtaposition between protagonist and antagonist. So just as important as Adam was just talking about the protagonist, the antagonist is equally as important, because that is the person who's creating conflict. And as we all know, for good storytelling, conflict is essential, because without it, there's no drama and there's no obstacle. So, Chris and Dailyn both pointed out that you can't go 15, 20 pages without good obstacle.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So it's really important to make your antagonist interesting and compelling. Really spend time sort of developing who they are and shape them into who they are. Obviously, most of the time your first half of your story is going to be focused primarily on the protagonist, where you're getting sort of bits and pieces of who the villain might be. But really, starting from the midpoint on, that's when your focus starts shifting towards your antagonist and really sort of understanding, what's driving them to win? Who are they? How are they pushing back on the hero? So really look to develop these sort of multi-layered characters and not somebody who just shows up and does bad things.
Right. And this obviously is that reversal we talk about in the second act. Halfway through the second act, there's the reversal. It tends to be that the antagonist is winning. The antagonist is taking over. And that's what we're sort of talking about in terms of switching the point of view. Obviously, this is also more film, be a little different in television. Let's go to the next slide. So this Michael Arndt, Chris mentions this. When this appeared in Hollywood a few years ago, every writer was talking about it, and we still are. All of my writer friends, we talk about this. It's actually a video, and it's really well produced. So we highly recommend you taking a look at it, and we'll provide it later. In a quick summary of it, it basically talks about these different levels of stakes, okay? And you have generally the protagonist is operating with these external stakes, these internal stakes, and then there's these sort of philosophical or thematic stakes that are also sort of operating. And they always have the protagonist kind of at the center of it. And then each level of stakes often they can have the same antagonist, but usually have different antagonists. So we're going to use a quick example from Star Wars that Michael Arndt uses, which is perfect because it shows you and it's all about getting that great ending. When you have the external stakes in Star Wars, which are very clear, it's save the rebellion, right? The rebellion is fighting, and Luke is going to lead it. Now, excuse me, our antagonist is Darth Vader. That's really, really clear. The internal stakes, which are often called the emotional stakes, these are the feelings. This is literally the emotion of what's going on in the inner life of our main character. With Breaking Bad, his internal stakes were his feeling of failure. For Luke Skywalker, it's this feeling of achieving his destiny and what he's always known him to be, but he doesn't have the confidence necessarily to have it. And he luckily meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, who will help him in that path of reaching that. So to achieve those internal stakes, use the Force. That's your greatness. Now, his antagonist, which aren't even kind of mentions as kind of a weird antagonist because you wouldn't think it, was actually his Uncle Owen. It's basically, you can't do this, Luke. You're just a farm kid. You're never gonna, that's a pipe dream. You're never gonna reach that destiny that you so desire. And then third are the philosophical stakes. Whenever we talk to anyone's in our any creative team in our groups, we will talk about themes. Themes are really, really important because they give a kind of unity to the story. They really allow you to hang a lot of give you perspective on how to see the show or the movie you're doing. Philosophical stakes, so like I said, are really important, but they operate kind of in a different way. So Luke is, again, the protagonist in Star Wars, and the philosophical stakes, this sort of central value or ethos of the story is selfishness versus selflessness, right? Whether you're just about taking care of yourself, looking out after yourself, or helping others. And interestingly enough, Arndt makes the point that in Star Wars, Luke is the protagonist, but the antagonist is Han Solo. Han Solo, who's the individualist. He's like, oh, I don't take care of anyone. I just want money. I just want to take care of myself. And at the end of Star Wars, all three of these stakes in literally a 2-minute scene all come into play when Luke is trying to blow up the Death Star. In this moment, he is literally fighting Darth Vader and trying to overcome the external stakes of saving the rebellion. There's using the Force. He gets rid of his computer screen because he's going to use the Force. That's his destiny, to be a great Jedi. And the philosophical stakes come into play because just as he's about to be killed by Darth Vader, who shows up? Han Solo, who is then proven to Luke, aha, you were right, Luke. It is about helping others. And so all three of those stakes in that final 2-minute section in the end of the film really all come together that create an awesome ending that we all love. Next slide.
Storyline. So you can go to the next slide. So, we talked about the A story, the B story, and the C story. And, in terms of how it pertains to structure, we thought Lord of the Rings would be a good example. So really in your A story, which again, that becomes your global introduction. It's the setup, right? So the what if, and this is like the moment in that movie where, we set up the mythology of the ring, and we set up, the fact that Frodo's uncle Bilbo has been on these amazing adventures, and that Bilbo himself would like to go on an adventure. And then sure enough, the catalyst comes around, right? Which is where Frodo gets the ring, and Gandalf, the wise, basically says, you need to return the ring and go on your own adventure. So this is where the journey begins and where our characters face the obstacles. So Frodo, with the help of his friend Sam, set off beyond their home, and they've never sort of adventured beyond the Shire. And it's the moment at the end of the first act where there's no turning back, we either move forward or we go back, and they decide to move forward. So that becomes your sort of global quest for the overall story. And then, of course, the B story is really where, you know, we're introducing sort of the fellowship, right? And the dynamics and the relationships between the different characters, and the fact that, you know, each character in that movie is dealing with their own sort of issues. And, you know, obviously we're also introducing the villain, you know, which is Saruman. And the idea is that Saruman is starting to introduce obstacles along the path of the fellowship. So, you know, like introducing a big storm that forces them to have to divert their path into a mine, where, of course, there are further obstacles. And then we also introduce the sort of the four dark, I forget what their names are, but the sort of the four horsemen, essentially, who are trying to chase down Frodo and the Fellowship to stop them from getting to their path. And then finally, the C story, which are really sort of these micro local subplots, which, you know, again, have to oftentimes deal with connection to the sort of the A story, where, for instance, Aragon, who is played by Viggo Mortensen, there's the C story about him and his relationship with Erwin, who is played by Liv Tyler, and the idea that he is destined to be king, which really echoes Frodo about facing the idea of who you are and your destiny, and how your friends must come together to kind of help you get through it.
It's very complicated. Very well done, Josh. That's a hard one. It's a huge story, and there's three of them, right? Next slide. So the way storylines work in television is a little bit different, but it's sort of the same thing in the sense that there's this A story, which is the central story of the episode. And so for a medical show or a police drama, it's the case of the week. But for something like Game of Thrones, which often has something what you call like it's all A stories, it's the problem that they have to deal with in order to get to the next thing. So this is what they call the A story. It tends to be very dominant in a procedural, right, or a character-driven procedural. You know, you have the patient who's going to die if they don't get the operation and that kind of thing. So that tends to be sort of the driving thing for the episode. Now, when we get to B story, this often, I mean, I think Dailyn called it like the soap story. So sometimes it's seen as more like the relationship stories. This is really about these character arcs, and these are dominant in serials. This is particularly true. Like whenever I'm talking about a show for a streamer, which is something that's usually bingeable. Why is it bingeable? Because it's the B story. It's what happened to these people and the relationships between these people that are driving you to watch the next one. So these B stories tend to be really, really important. And obviously everything's moving to streaming, but even with broadcasts, you'll have multiple shows, particularly in Ukraine, multiple shows at the same time. So you really want to use those B stories as a way to drive you to the next episode. This is what's going to drive you through the entire season of the show. So A story kind of tends to be contained, or the problem is contained, although the major goal may continue. And with B story, this is what's going to drive you to the next. Then you have the C stories. This is the same idea in the film. These are subplots that we sometimes call runners. These echo the main ones and will tend to take up less time. They literally are smaller storylines that will fill up and sometimes feed into either the B story or the big A story. Next slide. We didn't talk too much about the differences because there's a lot to talk about, but generally speaking, comedy follows a similar thing for dramas, but it's just, they tend to be half hours, so there's less time to really do it. So your A story is really the main sort of thrust of the story. In a general format for the comedy structure is you have this sort of problem that the main character is trying to deal with. The character in the first act sets out on the journey to try to solve it. They usually mess it up and make it even worse with their solution. And then by the second act, they're in the midst of trying to figure out a solution, and maybe they come up with something that might solve it, or something outside of them solves it. And then by the third act, when they tend to be within 3 acts, the third act is that the thing gets resolved, but almost always it fails, or so, you never really succeed. You always kind of return back to normal, to that sort of original place that you began at. That's kind of the general structure of a comedy. They always kind of end up returning that same place. The B storyline, these tend to be much shorter. This is often what we'll call runners. They can be short or funny. And then the C stories, and Dailyn mentions this, the C stories in a comedy are like bits, like a little, like in Friends, you know, Joey does something silly, like Joey's going to an audition. That's it. It never comes up again. It really doesn't drive the story forward. It's just a comedy bit. But with shows that you have multiple characters, you need to make sure that some of the characters who aren't essential, they aren't part of the big A story or part of the B story, this gives them time to sort of, you know, fill in or make sure we pay attention to them. Okay, next slide.
Process. You can go to the next slide. Go back. Yep, there we go. Yeah, so this was something that obviously Dailyn and Chris both covered and is extremely important. And both Adam and I cannot stress this part of the process enough. It's really important to not just dive immediately into a screenplay and write a screenplay, right? It's important to take a step back, start broad, figure out what your story is about, and then drill down. So basically you want to start with your summary synopsis. And this is really, really macro, right? You just want to be able to summarize each act in 1 paragraph. And it should be really no more than 2 to 3 pages. So assuming you're happy with that, then you want to go to your beat sheet, which is the next step. And your beat sheet needs to reflect and be consistent with your summary, right? Like you don't want your summary to be completely different from your beat sheet. So basically the beat sheet is just a more detailed version of your summary, where you're starting to fill in the details, where you're starting to break out plot points for each act. And you know, this is where you can start getting into more information about what happens in each act. But again, you still want to keep it fairly broad. You don't want to get too detailed, meaning like, I don't care at this point what that person eats or drinks, right? Like we want to just make sure that the flow of it feels like it's working appropriately. From there, assuming it seems like it's still in good shape, you then want to go to sort of your treatment phase. And your treatment phase is really sort of your last phase in terms of the outline phase before you'll go to script. And this is where typically you'll get like a 12 to 20 page sheet sort of outline. And this is where like you have these individual scenes and moments and really sort of create these detailed sort of slug lines where when you do go to script, all you're doing is basically filling in the dialogue and sort of expanding these scenes with sort of narrative details and sort of correspondence between your characters. But it's really important that you do not go to your script phase until the treatment is in great shape, because that is going to be your roadmap for your script. And then from there, you're going to import the step outline into a screenwriting software, which will then help you sort of format for you. And then most importantly, and both Chris and Dailyn discussed this, is that be comfortable to kill your babies. If something is not working, get rid of it, right? Don't feel like you have to sort of stand by it because it's something that you really like. If it's not working, and this is where getting outside reads is really important, because every screenwriter says the same thing, is like you need a fresh eye, you need a fresh view of something, and they're really going to be the ones that sort of give you that feedback that you're going to need to know whether something is actually working or not. And and don't become defensive, right? If somebody says like, oh, well, this section of the script feels like it's really slow and boring, take that to heart, right? And look at it and look at ways to improve it. You go to the next slide.
Yep. And this is, I mean, obviously both of these things take a lot longer. There are a lot of books to read about this, and we'll answer questions in a second. So this is sort of just to conclude, but in a very kind of quick way of understanding, I mean, I spend months doing this with teams for TV shows. This is sort of how you put together a TV show, right? You, as Dailyn was talking about, you go down, you have a big board out in front of you, and you put down the big tent poles. These are the big moments that are happening in the show. And this is sort of when we talk about like the global problem. Remember what Dailyn said, the narrative question. Now, what she was saying, I don't think we were totally clear there. There's the narrative question, again, for the entire show, for the season. And then each episode takes a part of that, okay? And if, well, look, if it's a more like a medical procedural, the big problem is you've got a hospital of doctors who are helping people. And how are they going to help these people in this condition or whatever else is going on with their love life? Each episode deals with that, right? Each episode is dealing with part of that. But if it's a show like the other extreme of that is Game of Thrones, where there's multiple storylines. You look at those big tent poles, those big things, and you have to know where you're going, right? You have to know kind of literally where you end the season. And then within that, each of the characters, your main characters, have arcs that you'd also kind of draw out and understand ahead of time. The second point is to really start thinking about your pilot. Now, your pilot has to establish what the big question is, the narrative question, the problem, the global problem, as well as the local problem of the episode. So it's often the biggest struggle that any writer has with writing a pilot is there's a lot to do. You're really trying to do a lot in this one episode. It's very hard. It's why it's very challenging, but you kind of have to do both. You really have to build a successful episode. It can't just be explaining everything. So it really has to have all the 3-act structure parts, right? The setup, the conflict, and the resolution. So you always, and this sort of notion of this hero's journey, it exists again within. Think of the episode as the crossing of the river, and the series as the entire global experience of getting through. And then finally, you have to figure out what are these particular episodes, right? What are the local problems for each episode that gets you to the end of that season to solve that larger question. You often will have to have summaries of those. And it's helpful to understand sort of the background of your characters. You write bios of the characters and really understand the arcs. And again, this goes to stakes, right? What are the stakes of your characters and how do they come and change? Chris talks about this as well. Your characters have to change at the end and be very clear about not just your hero, but even the supporting characters. I hear from sometimes writers in Ukraine, oh, this is just a secondary character, it doesn't matter. No, it does matter. Those characters have to be developed. And very important, your antagonist, your villain. It can't just be Dr. Evil, right? Which is like a character who's just meant to be funny. He has to, or she has to, have real stakes and their own kind of view of the world. So you make sure you understand the arcs of those characters. All right, that will cover that. I think we're done with the deck. We can go to full frame and we'll open up for questions. And thanks, everyone.
Дякую. Друзі, мене звати Дмитро. Я сьогодні
Thank
буду...
you, dear friends. I'm Vadim. I'll be your moderator today as for the questions. So if you've got any questions, would you please raise your hand? I'll come up to you with the mic, then you ask it, and our speakers will answer. This is the procedure. Do we have the questions? There are some questions.
Hello, Josh. Hello, Adam. Yes, thanks a lot for your useful lecture. My name is Christina. I'm the first year student of screenplaying. Yeah. Да?
And feel free to speak in Ukrainian or Russian.
It's okay. It's okay because I was trying to see what question I want to ask because I know some. And my main question is about reverse storytelling and the structure. Is it the normal classical way or you flip it? And where is the climax? I mean, like the second half belongs to Antagonist. So in that case, if I want to tell the story in reverse, where is the ABC? How does it work?
Okay, I think what you're talking about is what we call the mid-act reversal. In the second act, the story reverses. So I'm going to take an example right behind Josh. It's always good to work an example. So we have Die Hard, and if you know the film, if you know the film Die Hard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first half of the film, we are with our main character, Bruce Willis, right? We know his life, we know his character. His wife is in there. We're with him in the building, trying to figure out what's happening. We don't know who the antagonist is. We think they're terrorists. We get in the little pieces, but we're very much in the point of view of him. And then there's a reversal. They're no longer terrorists. They're actually just bank robbers, right? They're basically just stealing, but they're using that as a ruse. And halfway through the film, if you notice, we're now with Hans. We're now with the bad guys, and we don't know where Bruce Willis is. He's running around, and we're now seeing the world through the point of view of the villain more so than we are from the antagonist, from the protagonist. And we know that the villain is coming after the protagonist. So that's what we mean by that sort of shift in point of view. It will differ with every project. It's very, very specific to what you're doing. It tends to be this kind of like what Josh had said earlier, where your hero has a plan. Your hero is going to do something. This is what your hero is planning. But halfway through the film, that switches, that fails. Whatever they were trying to do will not work. And that's when that reversal happens. And that's when whoever, it's usually the antagonist, has created the failure or has created the obstruction that makes it impossible for that hero to do it. So the hero has to now find another way. But in the meantime, we tend to be seeing a lot more of what the antagonist is doing, about why the antagonist is doing it and how the antagonist is putting up obstacles against the hero.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, good. Okay.
Бачу питання. Друзі, у нас буде...
Any other questions, dear friends? We have some questions online, so we'll read one question loud, then one here. So a question from the online, from Volodymyr Boguslavsky. Good evening. And how detailed should be the action scene done by the screenwriter? Do you add a lot to the script while you are shooting?
I mean,
that's a good question for you, Josh.
Yeah. This from a producer standpoint. I mean, things change during production, obviously. So you know what's on the page isn't always exactly how it's shot, especially locations and as you said, action sequences. Some things are possible, some things aren't possible. But basically, you do want to write and have in your screenplay the basic direction of how that scene should play out, right? So it's our job as the production to follow the director's lead, who is then following the screenwriter's lead. So I would say write as much detail as you can and sort of your vision for how that should play out. And obviously, when it actually gets shot, there's some things that you're going to have to fill in the blanks on. But it is important that we understand your intention for what the scene should look like. If a building blows up, you need to write that not only does the building blow up, but John McClane wraps, a fire hose around his body and jumps off the building, right? Like that needs to be figured out because we are following the screenwriter's direction.
And I think that also, a director will get involved and make some changes and whatever. But to Josh's point, you've got to get us across those rivers. So even if it's not so much about the detail, it's about the solution. It's about, you created this problem, this is the solution. But also in the page count and if this is a big significant action scene, you have to write enough detail to let us know that, okay, this is 4 or 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes of the movie. So it's significant. And you make sure that you provide enough detail that takes as much time. Think of one page being about a minute of screen time that we know, okay, this is going to be a 5-minute action scene, not just a 30-second action scene.
Дякую. Наступне питання.
Thank you. The next question then.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Thank you for your guests. Okay, I'm speaking Ukrainian. Підкажіть, будь ласка,
Would you please tell, I'm a big fan of the script structures, of the 3-act structure, and what you told was very useful, but I've got the question. If the script does not stick to this structure and has its own one, well, for instance, does it have the chance to attract attention of the producers or the film directors if this idea is just super overwhelming and wonderful? Is it theoretically possible to make such a script which does not obey the rules popular?
I'll take that one, Adam.
Okay.
Again, everyone has their own approach to storytelling. And, again, like it's very clear, we made the point of like, just because some professional writer tells you to, at page 17, you have to have your catalyst does not mean you have to have your catalyst as the writer. With that being said, we're all trained to sort of look at storytelling on a global level, right? Which is really, again, goes back to the 3-act structure, where there's always a setup, there's always sort of the middle part, which is your conflict, and there's always a resolution. And it's extremely important to sort of follow that sort of format, because if you basically write a story where 50 pages of your script is set up, and then you have 10 pages of conflict, and then 30 pages of sort of resolution, I'm going to be like, hey, there isn't really much of a story here, right? Like, I don't know what your story is about. Like, I get you're trying to set up a lot of stuff, and I get you're trying to resolve a lot of stuff, but there's no meat in the middle. And I think, doesn't mean that if you came up with a completely different way of storytelling, doesn't mean it won't work, but the chances are that it just puts a lot more pressure on you to have to execute nearly perfectly, right? You have to write a perfect script. And again, even in the best case scenario, again, it boils down to just basics and being able to really create a familiar formula to storytelling. And then from there, you can sort of mix things up. I mean, even like a script or a movie, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chris Nolan's Memento, which is, one of his earlier films. I mean, that is about as non-traditional as a story as you can get, because that movie is told in reverse, basically. But even if you look at the structure of that project, it is still a 3-act structure. And it still very much follows all the basic points that Adam and I went over today.
And I would just add, because Memento is a good example. Pulp Fiction is another example. all of the examples, anything by Buñuel, experimental or even experimental filmmakers, there's one thing that isn't common. It tends to be that if you're going to be experimenting with that structure, you're going to direct that film. So it tends to be the writer director who really will execute it, because it's very difficult to put this all on page. I've read scripts by David Lynch going, I don't get it. Where's the movie there? And then I see his movie and it's brilliant. So obviously the script is there for the dialogue, so the actors know what they're going to say and what that scene is, but the real cinema, the real art of it doesn't come until he directs it. So in those kinds of examples, I can't think of really any example, maybe partners who've been working together, they have to direct it. They have a very specific vision. As you know, as Josh just said, they're very precise.
Yeah, and I just add a real quick point, is that very few people can get away with it, right? Quentin Tarantino can get away with it because he's such a master at his craft. But, you know, if you're trying to make something that has an audience more than one, which is yourself, you know, it's important to sort of follow these basic points.
Дякуємо.
Thank you. The question from the online, from Love. Where can you find some of the examples of the scripts if you're just a beginner?
Online. They're all over the place.
Yeah, there's Reddit normally has it. I mean, literally, if you type in a script PDF, you could typically find it somewhere on Google.
Literally type the name of the movie, PDF, and script. And if it's a well-known movie, it might be harder to find specific Ukrainian films or, you know, Russian language films. Then you'll have to go to libraries or film archives. They will keep them. But you generally, for almost all the big American films, you can find them quite easily.
And I also want to add real quick, Adam, that, you know, I know Chris mentioned Save the Cat, which I understand is actually being published next week in Ukrainian.
That's right.
He's got a very good website where he actually goes through his process with scripts. And I think you can find the scripts on the website, but he really sort of breaks down the structure of how these scripts are, like where the setup is, what's the catalyst, what's the ABC storylines and all that stuff. So that's another site that you guys should go to, that provides screenplays.
And I think the way what he does is he does a beat sheet. So he really breaks down kind of that part of the process. The caveat, though, because the criticism of Save the Cat, which I do agree with, is that he gets a little like, it's got to be on page 12 or whatever. He's very, very specific. I don't think that's necessary. There is a general area. I think people can get a little too dogmatic about some of these things. Honestly, the best book about structure is written by Aristotle, and it's called Poetics. That's what I used. That's what every writer has used from every playwright. It really is what lays it out in classical form. And that's where everything is coming from.
Дякую. Чи є питання із залу?
Thank you. Are there any other questions here? Yes, there are some.
Hi guys, thank you for the very informative presentation. My question is that once we grasp all of that structure stuff and start putting things together, what are some common mistakes and how to avoid them? And also when we go to the dialogue part, like we start to reading actually the script. So how to make our dialogues more believable? Like I have a problem like that my dialogue, I kind of read that people don't really talk like that. So maybe some tips on that.
I know that problem.
Встречаемся с такой проблемой.
My wife will often read my scripts and tell me, you know, this isn't how people talk. So the answer to that question is get people to read aloud to you. often by hearing your own dialogue back, you're going to hear, oh God, that doesn't sound right. I have friends who do go get some wine and food and, have everyone over, or do it on Zoom. That's also something we're doing now. Get a bunch of people who are ideally actors, get them a copy of the script and get them all to read it so you can actually hear it. That's a really, really helpful thing. I think also with dialogue, when you're moving from the outline and from the treatment to the script, look, people can fall in love with their own dialogue, and it's back and forth, and it's I'm funny, or I have these kind of bits and I love these characters. It may only be funny to you. So that's something where you have to kind of get other people's feedback, but you look at the page count, right? If I have a scene that's between two characters and it goes longer than 3 or 4 pages, I don't know. I mean, that might be kind of pushing the edge, right? You generally have an idea about how long a scene should be. They're usually 3 at most to 5 pages. Obviously, it can change. We can have very tight dramas that are just the 2 people. But even that, you need a shift. You need to go into something. This is a film. This isn't a play. So when your dialogue just kind of keeps, and it's a lot of dialogue like, hey, how you doing? I'm good. What's up? Oh no, how you doing? Like, it's like that kind of dialogue. You may write it just to get it out, but what I do is I go back and I cut it. You cut right to the moment where you really start to get something that's engaging. Because then, and you can also, when you're hearing it back and people reading it, then you'll know, oh yeah, that's interesting. Josh, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I one of my favorite notes is giving people saying like, hey, your dialogue's too on the nose, right?
Yeah.
Or, nobody speaks like that. So I think what Adam is saying is correct. To sort of answer your first point about where do people sort of get crossed up in terms of like format and structure and stuff, I think it's really where, this is why we want to stress, like, don't get too bogged down in the technical weeds of what other people are saying that you may or may not have to do, right? Is that sometimes people are so concerned about hitting all those points that they actually lose the sense of like their own storytelling, right? Because it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm on page 45 and I don't have my midpoint yet. And I'm gonna just sort of like create this sort of contrived manufactured midpoint rather than letting the storytelling dictate what that sort of midpoint reversal is. So I think, my recommendation is like, obviously follow the format, but also don't lose sight of the story you're trying to tell.
Thank you so much.
I would just add also, I had a writer who was my old boss tell me, you really just let it all out. The first draft of a script is, he called it like your id. It's just like letting it all out. And really, because those are sometimes moments where they are really powerful, or that's where you're going to discover something that you didn't see in the outline or you didn't see in the treatment. It's really in the dialogue when the characters are talking to each other, you're going to discover stuff. So don't worry about all this even. It's not something to do in the moment. Finish the draft. Even if the draft is long, it's 120 pages for a film, or it's 70 pages for an hour-long drama. If it's too long, that's okay. Now you're going to cut it. So don't edit yourself. Don't have this internal editor while you're writing, because you may lose some of that. It's okay to go long when you're just doing it yourself, and then go back and cut it. But go back and cut it, because if you don't, it's gonna bore the reader.
Okay, thank you guys. Very informative.
I've been told that we are short in time, so I'm going to ask you to make more quick answers.
Okay.
Наступне питання з онлайну. Добрий вечір.
The next question from online. Good evening. Katerina says, thank you for an interesting discussion. Can I find the storylines descriptions anywhere with the examples of certain films or TV series? And it would be interesting if you could explain different genres.
Again, online, I don't know. I mean, again, it'll be different if you're just talking Ukrainian films or even just European films that have smaller audiences. Go online. These sites that Josh was talking about, Save the Cat, I think they do that. A lot of sites will do that. Josh, is that your impression?
Yeah. I say again, I'm not a screenwriter, so to speak, so I'm not as bogged down in sort of the educational side of that. But Save the Cat, every person I know uses that as sort of a reminder. I love going on that site and just sort of, I'll read something, I'm trying to figure out, hey, there's something not right about the script. What can I use as sort of a reference point to kind of remind me of what needs to be done? And Save the Cat, as Adam said, they have these beat sheets of very well-known international films that breaks all this stuff down in very, very simple terms. And
the genre thing. Well, I was going to say, we don't have time to talk about genre. That's going to be another discussion. But in 2 days, on Thursday, we're going to be talking about genre. We're not going to be talking about all genre. We're going to be talking mostly about police procedurals. But that is something that is really multiple conversations to understand genre, both in terms of how you analyze film or analyze TV shows and how you write them. But it's vitally important. It affects all these other things that we haven't talked about today that have nothing to do with structure, like tone and mood and all those other things that are also really, really important. We'll get into that a little bit on Thursday. So please come back and check us out then. We'll dive into that a bit.
Hello, my name is Kirill. I'm from the director's course here. So is there any demand that nowadays has to happen more things in those, say, 100 pages, like more scenes, more actions, due to general life speed up? Life's like speeding up, so that is there any demand that like more things need to happen in a film?
I don't know again, that'll speak to the nature of the film, what you're doing, the kind of story you're telling. One thing though, Josh, and I think you'll agree with me, it's like, because we talk about this a little bit on Thursday, audiences are smart. They're sophisticated. They have watched a lot of movies. They have watched a lot of TV shows. So one of the things that's happened, this has happened throughout the history of film and television, is you're going to have to tell stories in a way that people exactly haven't seen this way before. So there is a kind of demand to be aware of the knowledge. If you tell the story exactly the same way, they told CSI, it's not going to work. People have seen that show. So there is a kind of sophistication in the audience that the audience will understand either the kind of show you're doing. So you're going to have to do something that really does something different and does it in a way that they haven't quite seen before. So I definitely think that there's always that aspect to be considering, because your audience, remember, this is about your audience. Think about their understanding of the genre, their understanding of sort of these stories.
Thank you so much.
The question from online, from Love again, which software exists for the script writing, or which would you recommend?
Josh, I'll answer this because I know this, but I forget the name. There's a free Russian, Ukrainian language software, and I'm sure someone in the audience knows it. I know because the colleagues I work with there, they use that, and it's free. The one that we use is usually Final Draft. It's not free and it's very expensive. So it's a bit of a barrier for people to use it. But I do, and I just can't remember. Does anyone happen to know the name of the online software there? Because I do know that there's one that Ukrainian writers are using.
Кит-сценарист?
Say again?
Кит-сценарист?
That might be it. Is there another? It's a free one.
Yes, it's a free one.
Yeah, that might be it. It's just very helpful to have. It makes it fast. You can still write on Word, or you can write without it, but it makes it it's just a lot harder.
Так, друзі, у нас ще одне питання.
Dear friends, one more question from online. Hello. What will you tell about the genre of mockumentary, whether it's relevant today? Thank you. And then we have one more question from the audience, and this will be it.
Josh?
I mean, it really boils. The mockumentary is obviously very specific. Obviously it worked with Bruno, right? Or what's the other one I'm thinking of with Ali G?
Borat.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, still waking up. Yeah, I mean, Borat is really the pinnacle of a mockumentary that has expanded borders. But the reality is it just boils down to execution. I think mockumentary tends to be very niche and small and specific. And, a lot of the time it's sort of in the eye of the beholder, which tends to be the screenwriter and the director. Not really taking into account what the audience is for that, but it doesn't mean there isn't a market for it. So, if that's something you're interested in pursuing, then go for it. But just, again, you still have to tell a good story. If you look at Borat, it still follows the 3-act structure.
Yeah. It's a style. A mockumentary, and the other name for it, if you're not, because mockumentary tends to be like for comedies. We also have one for dramas called found footage, which is like the Paranormal Activity or these, and they both tend to be cheap, inexpensive ways of making movies, right? But they're a style. They're not a structure. And they're very much about a way of making the film or TV show. Even you could argue like The Office or Parks and Rec or Gramada, the community TV show, which was in Ukraine that we helped work on. Those shows feel like the camera's there and it's like a documentary. That's again a style, not a structure, and will require you to still think about the same exact structural components that we discussed today.
Good afternoon. My name is Shervin. I'm on the producer's course. I have a question about one of my stories that I'm currently writing. I'm facing a little problem that I cannot get a transition between the scenes, as in I'm not sure where I'm failing in a bit, as in the movie, if it's a movie or if it's a TV series, like a mini TV series. I know that it has been going on along for a long time right now. And I'm just interested to see if I'm losing my transition and I'm seeing bits of the story, but I cannot put them all together into one piece. Would you have a little suggestion here?
Well, it's very specific, right? So yes. I'd have to, you should take that project and apply to Pitch UA so we can then come and be your mentor. Generally speaking, though, if you're having a problem with a transition, I find it's about taking a wider perspective of it and really understanding where is that, if the transition's not working, it's usually because you're missing something in the middle. And that's when you have to take a look at the structure of it, saying, is this the right place for that thing to happen right after that? Because that often is the case. Generally speaking, I mean, that's the crossing the rivers. That's the, how do you get from this topic to this topic? How do you make that turn? So again, it might be you having to take a step back and figure out, is this in the right order? And that might be part of it. But again, it's a little difficult without seeing it. Josh, what's your?
Yeah, I mean, I did like your answer, Adam. Apply to pitch UA. I think that's the right answer. You know, look, if you're struggling between whether this is a film or a TV, I mean, you really have to ask yourself, the great thing about a film, right, is that there's a beginning and an end, where with a TV show, there'll eventually be an end, but you don't necessarily have to figure it out right away, right? But with television, you also have to figure out, can I expand this idea with the characters and the story over the course of multiple episodes, right? So that becomes the challenge with expanding something in television. So I think that's the first thing you have to ask yourself. Obviously, there are lots of examples of films that never got made that then were completely revamped and done as television shows. In fact, Squid Game is a good example of the most recent success of, here was a film that would try to get made for 10 years, couldn't figure it out, and then he changed it into a TV show. But you have to be able to expand and tell the story over a long period of time.
Yeah, that's the problem. I actually have the story. I have it like written down, but I have it in pieces. I cannot connect them together. That's my problem. And I cannot fit it into one movie because I already have about 200 pages. And well, it's going to be a little too big for this kind of genre that I'm writing currently.
I mean, it sounds like it's a TV show. You know what? I mean, again, we have to look at it specifically. We did Josh and I did a talk with Craig Mazin, who did Chernobyl. And he's more of a film guy, but he made an incredible TV show. But he says himself, you know, he can't necessarily keep going on. He needs to see the end. So maybe go back and look at that. I don't know if that'll help you, but that was a really good talk in kind of understanding that place in between film and TV, because that's kind of what Chernobyl was. It was that TV show for HBO, obviously is a big historic event for Ukraine, but is the way he tells that story, the way he finds what are the key things in each episode and how to organize that might be helpful for you, because I think it sounds like you have a bit of that kind of organization problem, that you have to find what are the key stakes, tent poles, we call them, the big moments that are really important that you have to sort of kind of discover and then build each episode around.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. Друзі,
Dear friends, I need to tell you that we need to finalize this meeting, but on Thursday we will go on. So please follow the announcements. Let's have a round of applause for our speakers.
Even for an actor, it was pretty interesting.
Okay.
Що ж, друзі, на все добре.
So, dear friends, see you soon and visit us again.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See you on Thursday.